Um, cut back on one of the groceries or whatever, so that you can do whatever you choose, because your question can be answered in a positive way, but do use super caution, because a triple 12 by and large is meant for corn. Plant the seed, get a little bit of moisture, get the fertilizer on there, and kabam! Well, it is a grass. The corn is up to shoulder high now by the 4th of July, so it can be done. But there are reasons not to. If you are prudent, and you and I have talked often enough to know that you are, I'd say you can get away with it. The average guy that wants to go out and slam it down before the football game today is probably not the one to try the triple 12.
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, we're trying to get some rain over here in Zanesville, but I was moving some hostas yesterday, and I've never seen the ground as hard as it is over here in Zanesville. Tough.
Did you not get any last Saturday while I was drowning down at the stadium?
Yeah, but it seemed like that really went away over here. I don't think we got as much rain over this way as you guys did in Columbus.
Well, let's expand on that just for a moment. You and I both know the value of water, and pure and simple. It is so extremely important right now. If a person doesn't have a little rain gauge, and they think back to when the last significant rain was more than just to dapple the dust from their windshield, please do set up a sprinkler and give it 2 or 3 hours. That's the way to get them through the winter.
And Dan, thanks so much for the call. Let's go back to the phone lines and say good morning to Patricia. Good morning.
Good morning.
How can we help you, Patricia?
Well, you hit a little bit on that hostas. I wanted to know if I could transplant them at this time of the year.
Yes, you definitely can. Dan was doing so. I am, let's just say, contemplating doing so or having it done in very short order. This is a good time. And the reason for it is hosta is, well, if the lawn is moist, and by all means then, if you're going to divide and or move any perennials, etc., do water day or two ahead, then let the excess drain away, and then go out and move the plant. This is the most successful possible start. Then, with hostas, you can dig and divide. You can divide in several ways, simply with a sharp spade, or you can take a strong stream of the hose and wash them out, break them apart, crown for crown, so to speak. There is a real good reason for doing it essentially right now, and that is the soils are still warm. They will be for probably up to 3-4 weeks yet. That'll give the newly planted plant, newly placed plant, a good start to put out new root. It won't be excessive, but there'll be enough root then to hold that plant in the ground over the winter against the freezing and thawing of natural movement in the soil. So getting it done now is really a very fine time. Dan would agree. He's already done it yesterday. I'm going to do it soon, and that's just ideal. And that then same thing, for the most part, would be true of many perennials. A few not so. They're better moved in the spring. I would say that thinking back now, I would have preferred to move a peony back August 15th instead of September 15th, but I still wouldn't hesitate to even move a peony right now. But I would put a little mulch down to stop that freezing and thawing, because that's one of the considerations for now.
Okay, then. Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling, Patricia. Happy to help you.
And we also have several email questions. You can always email Fred a question. It's simple. Just go to our website, which is planttalkradio.com, and click on the Ask Fred button, or you can send it directly. It's fred@planttalkradio.com. And this one comes from Ann, who sounds like she's having a pretty serious problem here, Fred. She says one of her young oak trees has been losing the tips of the branches. Now, she notices areas where the bark on the stems and the trunk are turning black. There's also some small nodules on the leaf stem bases. She says there are ants running up and down the trunk, and she wonders if that is contributing. Any remedy here?
Well, yes, and I think if I understand, even though not seeing this, there's probably a couple things happening. The nodules on the stems of the leaves are probably one of the many normal galls on oak trees. I don't know, I've heard 50, 60, 70 different kinds of galls on oak. They are all an annoyance to the viewer, but they do not necessarily seem to do many problematic things to the tree. Now then, back to the stem tips. I wish she and I could communicate on, has the leaf color of this oak changed over the last 3 or 4 years from, we'll call it rich, deep green, somewhat glossy, as oaks may be, down to more yellowing and vein patterns showing and so on. That could indicate chlorosis, and chlorosis can go from just leaf discoloring to stem dieback and so on. I know also that young squirrels will practice making a nest by clipping off the ends of the stems. Sometimes they don't get them clear cut off. The teeth don't bite clear through, so they'll hang dead and brown. But then we get back to the ants on the tree, pretty much normal. However, with the other things happening, seems to be a decline in the tree's health, at least as best I can guess, and there could be cankers working that will be, to an ant, much like us tapping a sugar maple in the spring. There will be a resinous or sappy area under the bark, between bark plates, etc. The ants are, without a doubt, going up to get a drink. That water would be just a hint sweeter, where you don't tap oak trees, you'll still pick up a little bit of the sugars of what's happening. So I'm going to suggest, with there being, I think, several things happening, that Ann call a competent arborist to come out and take a good look at the tree. Now, we don't know the size, but any tree, as far as I'm concerned, is worth saving, and the bigger they get, the longer it would take to replace them, if it could even be done, and therefore the better to share a few bucks with an arborist that knows what's happening and can set up a program for the owner to follow, or proper treatment by the arborist, because trees are good and they're worth saving, and it takes a good opinion to get started with.
You know, if you miss one of our shows, you'd like to listen to it again, you can always go to our website. We put our past shows on there, and you can also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and get the latest show sent right to your phone or any device that you want. More from Fred coming up next on Plant Talk. Stick with us.
This summer at Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, the gardens are in full color. Walk amidst tropical and native butterflies in flight in the indoor Pacific Island Water Garden. View the conservatory's bonsai collection and experience the exhibition Origami in the Garden. Find details at fpconservatory.org.
And welcome back to the program. Mark News here alongside Fred Hauer. And Fred, Deanna called during the break, and she said you were talking about mums. Mm-hmm. And she wants to know if all mums are perennials. And she said somebody told her only certain colors of mums come back. Now, this is something we've talked about before. Mm-hmm. I've never had very much luck at all getting them to come back, unless they're in a real sheltered area.
Well, now, Mark, I'm going to go back to my youth in this industry. There was a time when mums were indeed only planted in the spring by the nursery. They would grow the entire summer. They'd be pinched back. They'd be done this, that, and the next thing. And then, just about now, they'd be dug, literally what we call popped out of the ground, put in various container sizes, clear up to bushel baskets, and then set in the garden center for planting. Now, that is because these plants developed the whole summer in one spot and were dug and cared for by professionals. Generally speaking, when you planted these big, somewhat fully established plants, they would come through the winter. Now, I'm going to divorce us from the color factor at this moment and go back to, I feel that for all practical purposes, until you get down into genetic specifics, all mums are perennials. Now, there are plants in the mum family, group, whatever you want to call it, that are not necessarily going to be perennials. But what I have found to advise people is, if you want it to be a perennial, if you want it to grow on in your garden and be that big, lush, fat plant in this fall, plant it in the spring. You can buy them at well, so to speak, pennies. Not quite certain. But instead of $15, you can buy them for $1.59 in the spring. You plant it, you do all the right things, pinch it, you too will have a plant that is then established in that spot, assuming all things are equal as far as growing conditions are concerned, not too wet, too dry, too shady. The plant is going to be very much more apt to come through the winter. Then we get into an old argument that I don't know quite where it stands for sure. The stem of a mum is hollow for all practical purposes. And the question then arises, do I cut them down in the fall or do I leave them stand? I have been told, and without true experimentation, I have found that to leave them alone where we don't open up that waterway down the middle of the stem seems to let them come through without decay, rotting, whatever. Now then, we come to color. And I guess I don't know the history far enough back, but the great big, fat, big, brilliant yellows seem to be the ones that are most apt to come through, hardiest. Now that again is a best guess. It's observation, not experimentation. So I think that I will still stay with that as a tendency. However, any well-planted mum in the spring, taken care of during the summer, full sun, all on and on and on, is probably going to come through as a perennial, and I don't think the color is that big a deal. So I'll simply say if you want to be perennial and keep them in place in your garden, start them in the spring. If you really want to just get some color for fall and then not have them take up a lot of garden space, plant them in the fall, let them die, and start over again.
There's that, too.
Yeah.
And Deanna, thanks so much for your call. We appreciate that. Fred, Mary Ann writes in. She goes, I've heard you talk a lot about hellebores and how they bloom in the late winter. Can I plant those in the fall, and where would be the best place to put those?
Well, let's start with the best place. Hellebores can handle some sun, most especially morning sun, but they are essentially a shade-oriented plant. Now, that doesn't mean deep, dark, dank shade. It's just simply that they don't like to burn in the sun in the afternoon. I've seen them many places. I have them in the open and sheltered spots. One of the places that was most beautiful was under some high-headed trees that cast a light shade, and those plants were fat and rich and colorful and so on. So, morning sun only. I would, however, absolutely, because they do not like to be moved in the first place, I would only try to move them in the spring. March, April, depending on exactly where you live, would be the time to pop them out. The bigger the clump that you take from the old plant, the more likely you're going to get a good transplant in appearance.
Now, she's planting new ones. Can she plant them now?
If they're containerized and she's careful when she takes them out of the container not to disturb the roots, frequently when I take a plant out of the container, I really get harsh with the roots, get them opened up and so on. The less damaging actions on the roots would be the best thing for the hellebores. If they're coming out of a container and have made it through the summer and so on, I would say go ahead. But then do mulch very lightly. Just 1 inch straw, big wood chips, whatever it might be, so they don't heave and so on. So
spring is better.
If you're going to transplant from your own plants or a neighbor or whatever, I would say spring. Container-wise, always changes the game plan because you're not really disrupting the roots as much.
And more from Fred Howard, the Ohio nurseryman, coming up next.
This summer at Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, the gardens are in full color. Walk amidst tropical and native butterflies in flight in the indoor Pacific Island Water Garden. View the conservatory's bonsai collection and experience the exhibition Origami in the Garden. Find details at fpconservatory.org.
And let's go back to the phone lines. Tim's on with us. Good morning, Tim.
Hey, good morning, man. How you doing today?
We're doing fine, Tim. How can we help you?
I'm thinking about putting in a lilac, and I thought maybe you could give me a heads up on what I should be thinking about as far as placement and timing. Okay.
Timing now or spring. I'll come back to that. The placement should be in reasonably well-drained soil. Not perfect, and yet don't get into the junk clay without improving it. And then full sun. Now, by full sun, any plant that gets 6 hours or more of sun is, for plants' sake, considered full sun. More than 6 is good. Lilac is a plant that will appreciate, is the way to put it, more sun, even dawn to dark, as far as that's concerned. Some of the Japanese tree lilacs and others, they stand as shade for other plants when they get bigger. So, sunny, well-drained, or at least reasonably well